Listening Library presents Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, adapted by Elizabeth Rudnick, read for you by Lucy Rayner.
Prologue. The moors were quiet. The fairies who called the lush land home were safe and protected. They spent their days playing and living among the beautiful trees, flowers, and plants that grew in abundance. They gathered in harmony and danced under the moonlight. They no longer feared the world beyond the borders of the moors. At least, not as much. They could sleep at night free from nightmares. They were free. They were happy. Aurora had seen to that. 5 years had passed since Maleficent had bestowed the greatest gift of all on the beautiful young princess. Giving her the kiss of true love, Maleficent had awoken the sleeping beauty and brought her back to rule over the fairies, as had been Aurora's wish. For 5 years, Aurora had ruled with grace and kindness, and under her rule, the moors had thrived. Maleficent too had found peace, as much as the winged fae ever could. She had been a steady presence in Aurora's life, and had spent her days happily flying in and around the moors, watching with pride as Aurora transformed from a young girl to a young woman, from a hesitant princess to a strong queen. She also watched as Aurora and Prince Philip grew closer, their bond deepening as their love became more real, more mature. Still unsure of humans, Maleficent kept Philip at a distance. But bit by bit, even his presence had become a familiar and almost welcome one in the moors. He spent more time there than in his own kingdom of Ulstead, which lay just across the river. But where there is light, there is also darkness. And darkness was coming to the moors. An unexpected evil that was only beginning to reveal itself. Chapter 1. Night had fallen. Inside the moors, fairies slept, lulled by the trickling water of the streams and the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees. Suddenly, the stillness of the night was broken by a loud snap. Somewhere at the edge of the moors, a twig broke. 3 human men, trespassers in the moors, froze at the sound. Looking nervously at each other, they waited to see if the noise had woken anyone, or anything. When no fairies appeared, they collectively sighed with relief. The youngest of the men sighed the loudest. Ben hadn't wanted to come in the first place. He had heard the stories of the moors. He had seen the huge winged fae who flew in the sky from time to time, and the sight always unnerved him. He thought the moors were too close, even with the river separating them from Ulstead. "They can fly," Ben told his family and friends when they teased him about his discomfort with the fairies. "Which means they could fly over the river if they wanted." It was hard to argue with that logic. But his friend Colin had told him it would be a quick and profitable trip, so he had agreed. Only now he was beginning to regret his decision. From the moment they had entered the moors, he had been covered in goose flesh. He knew it was silly, but he felt as though the trees themselves were watching, the grass listening. Even at night, Ulstead was brighter, torches lining the streets, and providing illumination in the darkest hour. Here the only light that shone was from the moon and stars hanging in the sky. And that night, the sky was dotted with clouds obscuring the little light they had. "Let's turn back," Ben whispered as Colin and the other man resumed walking. "And lose good money?" the third man, Thomas, said, shaking his bald head. "Not a chance." Ben frowned. He didn't know Thomas. They had just met that night. But Ben didn't trust him. His eyes were calculating and cold. He was the one who had convinced Colin to embark on this expedition across the river, and Ben had a feeling it wasn't going to end well. "Stay close," Colin said, looking over his shoulder at Ben. He didn't say anything more, but he didn't need to. Ben knew that look well enough. Colin was telling him to stay quiet and keep his head down. They both needed the money, no matter the danger. Reluctantly, Ben followed the men farther into the woods. Deeper in, the sounds were more muffled, the night even darker. Coming to a stop in front of a tall tree, Colin nodded. "Here we are." He pulled a small axe from his pack and began to hack at the trunk of the tree. The sound surprised Ben, and he flinched. Colin kept swinging until, finally, a huge chunk of bark came free. Behind it was a small woodland fairy. The creature was sleeping, slightly snoring, with its little eyes closed. Quickly, Colin reached out, wrapped his hand around the fairy, and stuffed the creature into a bag he had over his shoulder. Colin pulled more bark free and continued to plunder the tree of its fairy occupants. Next to him, Thomas was doing the same, his bald head bent as he focused on his mission. Ben looked down and saw that the tree was covered in mushrooms. But soon the fungi began to move and squirm, and he realized the toadstools were actually fairies who looked like mushrooms. Taking a deep breath, he reached out and grabbed one. "Ow!" Ben shouted as the mushroom fairy bit him on the finger. The creature was small, his teeth smaller still, so his bite wasn't deadly. But it stung. "You'll pay for that," Ben said. The fairy bit down again, harder this time. Reflexively, Ben dropped the mushroom fairy, who immediately took off into the woods. Ben followed, exchanging insults with the fairy as they ran. In moments, they had left the thick, muffled stillness of the forest and raced into a clearing. Still shouting insults, Ben plodded into the wide open space. Out there, he was no longer protected by the shadows of the trees. The other two men had disappeared from view, swallowed up by the forest. But Ben didn't care. He was too focused on getting the fairy into the bag. He slowed his steps and came to a stop. Like a predator on the hunt, Ben sank to the ground and quieted his breathing. Then he waited. Not hearing footsteps behind him, the mushroom fairy stopped too. It was only for a moment, but it was just long enough. Shouting, Ben took a diving leap. He flew through the air and then landed on the ground, his hands wrapping tightly around the fairy. As the creature wiggled and squirmed, Ben laughed triumphantly. "I'll get double for a mushroom," he said. "In you go." Stuffing the fairy deep into the bag, Ben turned. Only then did he realize he was far from where he had started. He headed back toward the woods. Meanwhile, Colin and Thomas continued to pluck fairies from the tree, oblivious to everything but the task at hand and the visions of money running through their heads. They didn't hear the sound of wings flapping or the gentle rustling of leaves behind them. They didn't realize anything was amiss until, suddenly, the sky went completely black, as if someone had turned off the moon. Colin looked up, and his eyes opened wide. Beside him, Thomas let out a shout. There was a thud as both men dropped their bags, releasing the fairies, who scurried away, murmuring to each other as they ran. Perched like something out of the men's worst nightmares was Maleficent. Her huge black wings were tucked tight to her back, her green eyes piercing. Her pale skin glowed a brilliant white, in stark contrast to the large black horns that rose from her head. As she looked at them, her red lips parted in a smile that sent both men running. They didn't get far. Lifting one long, thin finger into the air, Maleficent signaled to the trees.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?